We're back on KMOX. United States Senator Roy Blunt is with me in the studio this afternoon. He's with his son Charlie as well, and we got into a little bit of trouble during the break because Charlie's 8 years old, and I said, I was probably 9 years old when I started messing around with my headphones, and I wanted to be a disc jockey. And then Charlie said, "What's a disc jockey?" And then I said, well, I wanted to play records. And, of course, we got into what are records, right? This is what happens when you have younger children.
Exactly. What are records? What are records?
You mentioned you were at the zoo earlier today. Was that an official visit?
It was. We had a chance to look around at some things at the zoo. And Senator McCaskill and Congressman Clay and I think Congressman Carnahan was involved in this for the last couple of years, have been trying to help the zoo with the fish and wildlife people to get a polar bear. They're putting in a new polar bear exhibit. And I'd been promising to come by and had several meetings here today with the mayor, with some people at Volpe Meat Products, and thought, boy, what a great time to come to the zoo, and picked old Charlie up about noon, and he went to the zoo with me, and we had a good time.
Let's talk about the sequester, which is, what was that, 3, maybe even 4 weeks ago? Has there been obviously some of this takes a little time to kick in, but have you heard from constituents? You talk about the meat factory. We were told meat inspectors weren't going to be there anymore, right?
Well, that's right. And I guess they wouldn't have been. I wrote this Secretary of Agriculture and said, are you going to be able to prioritize these workers whose very presence is necessary for other people to work? And he said no. Now, interestingly, Mark, if there was no government, if there was a government shutdown under both President Obama and when we actually had a government shutdown under President Clinton, these were among the employees that were told you have to show up even if there's no money. Now, why would they have to show up? Because 500,000 people in America work in facilities where if the U.S. Department of Agriculture inspector doesn't show up, nothing can happen. The facility can't open. Nobody can do anything. So those people wouldn't get paid. And as the leading Republican on the Senate Ag Appropriations Committee, working with our new chairman of that committee, Senator Pryor from Arkansas, we were able to get an amendment passed, one of the very few that passed, that transferred from money from one category to another, so that now there's money so that the 40,000 people that work in that work in Missouri, 500,000 people in the country, 40,000 in Missouri, all won't miss 11 to 15 days of work between now and the end of October. And the estimate for all of those families, they would have missed $400 million worth of pay would not have been paid to those hardworking families, just simply because a few federal inspectors didn't show up, one per facility didn't show up at their facilities to make that work
Ripple
happen.
effect on that, right? Domino effect.
Domino effect. And then at the end of the day, you'd have less meat, less poultry, less everything on the store shelves by October, November, December. Meat prices would have gone up. Egg prices would have gone up. And fortunately, we were able to stop that from happening. It's more of what we need to do. I actually had one other amendment that said any employee that's works, its job is absolutely necessary for health and safety, like the air traffic controller, the food safety inspector, the border control agent. They have to be there. You have to pay them, and you have to prioritize them among the person. If they don't get their filing done that day, that's a bad thing, but eventually they would catch up, and nobody's safety would probably be impacted by that. And I'm still going to work to get that done in this Congress, because I think the Budget Control Act is here to stay for a while.
Well, let's talk about the budget. The Senate, do I have this information actually? Did they pass a budget?
50-49. The Senate passed the first budget in 4 years, and that's a good thing, to actually do what the law requires. And I was pleased to vote for the bill that said if you don't pass a budget, senators don't get paid. I sponsored that in the last Congress, and we didn't get anywhere. But in the first few days of this Congress, we did. And turns out that getting paid apparently was a pretty good motivator, because the Senate, for the first time in 4 years, passed a budget. And I think what we're going to see now is we're also having a much greater chance to actually debate the appropriation bills, try to amend them, talk about our priorities, because suddenly we can't just do everything we want to do. There's a cap on what you can do in law for 10 years, an annual cap on how much you can spend on the discretionary side of the budget, just like every family, virtually every family I know has a cap, and they have to make choices. Well, this is going to require the federal government to begin to make some choices as well.
But unless we start making choices about the entitlement programs, we're really still going to spiral out of control, isn't that?
That's a very good point. And, this discretionary side of the budget is the 38% of all the spending. So 62% of all the spending is spending the so-called mandatory spending that even if the Congress never met, that money would go out the door until you change the definition of these programs. For everybody who is a certain age and signed up for Social Security check is calculated and paid to them, the Medicaid check, the Medicare check.
Listen to this. I don't know if you heard this story. This is related to that. I'll give credit here to NPR. This was an NPR story. I tweeted it earlier by Chana Joffe-Walt. In the past 3 decades, the number of Americans who are on disability has skyrocketed. The rise has come even as medical advances have allowed more people to remain on the job and new laws have banned workplace discrimination. Every month, 14 million people now get a disability check from the government. That's a stunning figure.
That is. And
you should read this article because it's quite fascinating, actually.
Well, it is. And, it's the one thing in Social Security people don't think about, the disability, the workplace insurance part of Social Security or the survivor benefits of Social Security. And so we're going to have to look at these programs. And if we don't look at them while President Obama is president, they're probably 3 years of looking really hard to find these annual savings in the discretionary part of the budget. But my view would be at the end of that 3 years, the next president absolutely has to turn to the mandatory side, or we'll never get to the end of where we need to be.
You know what? We ran out of time very quickly.
Great to be with you.
Come back and see me soon.
Now that I know where you are.
Charlie, good to see you, buddy.